take a second to let everyone in.
Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Fuller. I'm the Senior Vice President here at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce, and I'm so happy to welcome you to today's Business Edge event with AHOLA. We're going to be tackling a really important topic around navigating the HR minefield. This is a question that comes up so often with our chamber members and so many in the community about how can we compliantly bring on new folks, do all the things that we need to do the right thing and be in business when it comes to HR and HR practices. So we're so happy today to have Dennis and Lori with us to walk us through a presentation and a conversation about navigating that minefield. I want to remind everyone that we will complete the presentation and have time at the end for question and answer. So should things pop up that you want to bring forward or discuss, just go ahead and pop those into the chat and we'll do our best to cover everyone's questions. So at this time, I'd like to welcome and introduce Dennis Lee and Lori Geiger, who are going to take it from here. Dennis and Lori.
All right, well, thank you for that, Kelly. And of course, my printer goes off right now. Thank you all for joining us, navigating the HR minefield. This should be a really good talk. I'm Dennis Lee. I'm a sales executive with AHOLA HR and Payroll Solutions. I want to talk a little bit about our company, just so you know who it is you're listening to today and taking advice from. We are a family-owned payroll company. That's where that word AHOLA comes from. All the time I hear, "Oh, you're with Aloha." Close, but not quite. It's their family name. Since 1967, we've been family owned and operated. We have the next generation VP of our company now ready to cook moving forward. So they're very passionate about being a family business. And we're really happy to serve the clients that we do. We process over 60,000 payrolls annually. That's over 4 billion in ACH funds for thousands of clients across the US. Just here in Ohio, we have nearly 2,000 clients. So, Ohio is our mainstay, but we can serve clients in all 50. And we provide a full range of payroll and HR services from pre-hire through retire. So that can be candidates applying to jobs all the way through benefits administration and HR consultation. And before we get too far, I kind of want to share a little bit about my story, about why I joined AHOLA, because I think it can help you understand, what sets us apart, what makes us a little bit different. So at the time, I was self-employed and I was at a volunteer event and I met the person who is now my sales director, Christy Ernst, at this event. We hit it off. She was great. So I started following her and following AHOLA on LinkedIn. And then I saw that they had an open sales position. Now, for me to join a company, I knew that I had to believe full stop in what it is I'm selling. So I dug in, I went full Sherlock Holmes, did all the internet research I could. The first thing that jumped out to me is that we're consistently named a top workplace. And that signaled to me that it was probably a company with really good culture. The next thing I found that really sold me and made me put in my resume was seeing that the client retention at AHOLA was 5 times the industry average. That's 10 years versus 2 years. So that told me, all right, they probably practice what they preach. They're probably doing a great job of taking care of clients. And I need that to sell. I can't sell something I don't believe in. So in the interview, I asked them what sets AHOLA apart from the rest of the competition. And they said that magic word that I was really looking for, and that was service. I'd been through experiences in the past where companies didn't necessarily follow through as well as they did, or as well as they said they would in the sales pitch. So hearing that AHOLA has this direct line of contact between our client and their customer success specialist that works inside of our headquarters, that was really important to me because I knew it would resonate with businesses out in the world. And so I've gotten to see it since I've been with this company for a while now. We really practice what we preach and taking care of our clients with white glove treatment, from training to education to just making sure everything runs smoothly. And most important, is that quick response. We've all dealt with that company where we're sort of playing guess who, where we call them and have to talk to 7 different people to get the answer we want. And that's not us at AHOLA. You have that one point of contact, you have your sales rep. So when you have a question, we have an answer quickly. And that's kind of my story. Lori, do you want to share a little bit about why you joined AHOLA?
Sure.
Hi, everybody. I am Lori Geiger, as Dennis introduced me. There are a couple reasons why I decided to join AHOLA. First and foremost, I grew up in the Cleveland area, and I grew up in a suburb just a few away from where the headquarters of AHOLA is based in Brecksville, Ohio. So it's been a name in the community, in the surrounding communities for years, and I've heard it for years. So the name recognition was the first. The second, in a former position, I had the pleasure of working with a lot of small business owners, and a lot of them actually used AHOLA for their payroll services. And as far as I know, they still do. They've had nothing better to ever say about their payroll services. They were just excited to hear that I was going to be working for AHOLA when I was telling everybody my goodbyes and just telling me all of their fun stories and about when they pick up their paycheck or when they talk to their client support specialist, or it made me feel very, very comfortable in my decision that I had made to come here. And lastly, one of my best friends had taken a job at AHOLA, and I did not know. And he told me at the very end when I said that I had applied. So just knowing how picky he is, I knew that I had made the right decision. So all those things combined really pushed me through the door. And I'm just celebrating my 3rd anniversary here, and I can't see myself anywhere else. Like Dennis said, it's the service that stands out for me.
All right, you can go ahead and go to the next slide.
So through today's presentation, we want to remind everybody that this is an informational webinar, and this information should not be taken as legal advice. You can go to
Next
the
slide.
next.
All right, so quickly through our agenda, the things we're going to talk about, the overview. First will be the common HR mistakes that we see businesses make, followed by the best practices that all business leaders and HR leaders should know about, then practical strategies to prevent those mistakes and safeguard your company, and then some real world examples. Go ahead, next slide. All right, so who is performing the HR duties in small businesses? This stat jumps out because I see it all the time. 54% of small businesses handle employment matters themselves to save money because they don't want to hire an HR representative. And 73% of employees have worked at a company where the HR person also had another job entirely within the company. I speak with many businesses every week. This is very common. I may well be describing your company, and that's okay. You just need to have the right resources in place to make sure that you're mitigating risk, that you're staying compliant, and that you're doing a great job of building a good culture for your employees. All right, go ahead, go to the next slide. All right, so you can see around this circle, these are the big 7 HR mistakes that we're going to talk about. And a lot of this comes as a result of the limited resources and the budget constraints to delegate those HR functions within a business. And the lack of dedicated expertise can lead to inconsistencies and lead to oversights, which can ultimately result in those costly fines and penalties. Next slide. And I'll kick this one over to you, Lori.
Okay, so the first big mistake is just getting somebody in the door. Gut feelings, hiring and firing. The first thing that I think most business owners and a lot of my clients worry about is I need a body. I need somebody in the door, right? I need someone to get the job done. What that can lead to is some very big mistakes in hiring and having a knee-jerk reaction and just hiring just anybody and not making sure that they are the right one for the job. And firing is, I would say, even bigger. Hiring, I'm not going to touch on as much right now, only because we're going to go ahead and talk about it a little bit later in the presentation with interviewing. But if you could go to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about firing on gut feelings. So I would say one of the biggest things that we hear from our clients is, help, I just fired somebody. I don't know if I was allowed to. I don't know if I should have. So what we like to do is talk to our clients through the entire process. One of the hugest mistakes that people, small businesses make when letting somebody go is not having proper documentation. Proper documentation is huge, and my clients know it's one of my favorite words that I like to use: document, document, document. The reason being, the more documentation you have, if you need to let somebody go, you have a stronger case should that former employee come back and say that they were wrongly let go. Having a job description is something that we really, really firmly believe in. Every employee should have a job description, and there are a number of different reasons for that. But in firing, it goes back to, was that employee doing all of their core duties, right? Or were they straying from that and they weren't really performing the functions that they should have? Without a job description, it's hard to say that this employee was let go because they didn't meet all the day-to-day expectations that they should have. Firing also is difficult when you don't have performance evaluations. So we always like to encourage our clients to do at least one performance evaluation written throughout the year, whether that is an extensive evaluation or something a little bit abbreviated. Everybody is different, right? And every company would benefit from one over the other. And as long as something is done throughout the year and documented, you really have a stronger case if you need to let somebody go. So for example, at regular performance review time, it's a great time to review what's going great with that individual. It's a great time to go over goals and a great time to go over things that you would like to see improve. A lot of small businesses think, okay, great, I'm done with my performance reviews. I'm going to move on to the next task. I don't have to worry about it for the next year. When we say annual performance reviews, we mean just the formal performance reviews. We don't mean those in between coaching moments. And if necessary, a performance improvement plan, commonly called a PIP. What that would be is if someone is not living up to their core expectations, bring that employee in, talking them through what's lacking, what goals they need to achieve, setting a timeline, and working through coaching that employee and making them better so it doesn't come to a firing situation. Performance improvement plans are widely used by a lot of our clients. They really appreciate the step-by-step guidance. And for those that are unfamiliar with it, it's almost like a checklist. It just kind of keeps you on track. And with our clients, we walk them through every step of the way. Then if it does come to a firing situation with an employee, it's easier to let that person go because you have evidence substantiated. You know, why are we firing this individual? And it's not as simple as, well, they never followed the rules. Well, if there's no documentation, there's no performance improvement plan, there's no performance evaluation, it's hard to prove that. And if that employee comes back and says they were wrongly terminated, they probably would win that case, whether it's excuse me, unemployment, or whether it's something more serious like discrimination. If you can go to the next slide, please. The number 2 mistake is small businesses are very often unaware of relevant labor laws. Labor laws affect every single business. A lot of my clients say, well, I just have 1 or 2 employees. It's okay. Well, at least that was their attitude before they started talking to me. My team likes to affectionately call labor laws a pyramid. Because if you just think of a pyramid, on the bottom is your foundation, right? And if you look at that as the first employee that you hired, and then on up, the bulk of relevant labor laws are going to start at that 1 employee mark, not at the 10 employee, not at the 20 employee, and so on, which are very, very important. But that first employee is where companies really need to say, okay, what the heck do I need to know? and what do I need to do and what do I not need to do. As a company grows, a lot of times they don't know, once they hire another employee, is it going to put them over a mark where they're going to have to go ahead and reevaluate which labor laws they're going to need to follow going forward. The biggest employee marks are that first employee, 15 employees, 20 employees, 50 employees, 100 employees. So it's continual. And if a small business projects that they are growing, it's always good to have that labor law in the back of their mind before moving forward and growing their business, just so that they know what they're walking into and they could be properly prepared for that. So as you can see here, an example of a labor law with 15 employees or more is a Pregnancy Discrimination Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. I think a lot of small companies aren't aware that they have to provide certain accommodations to certain groups of people when they hit that mark. So those are some of the very, very important reasons why we need to know our labor laws, right? We need to know, once I grow, once I'm at this number, what am I going to need to do and who do I need to accommodate? There's a lot more out there than I think a lot of people realize, and that's what we're here for. If you could go to the next slide, please. So one of the most recent changes in legislation just happened last year in 2023, and the government made a very big deal out of it, which they should have. It's Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, or PWFA, as we like to call it behind the scenes. The government put out additional accommodations that need to be followed for pregnant workers. This doesn't start at that 15 mark like the previous screen showed. This is something that every single employer needs to be aware of. I know that a lot of employers say, well, you know, it's a desk job, it's fine. That employee can sit down, no big deal. It goes beyond that. So just an example of how we go through with all of our clients. Here's something new that's coming through legislation. How is it going to affect your company? Are we at the 1 employee mark? Are we at the 15 employee mark? Is this going to affect you or isn't going to affect you? And if it is going to affect you, how do we move forward? Do we need to perhaps put out a new policy? Do we need to just have some employee and manager education? So with our clients, we really like to get in front of things like that, and we like to tackle it head on, because if small companies go forward and they're not aware of these labor laws that exist or that are going to be put into effect or just change, they can find themselves in a lot of sticky situations. And that's something that we really would like small businesses to avoid. If you go to the next slide, please. Mishandling of employee files. That's a very, very big one. Employee files, a lot of minds go to different things. You might think just a personnel file with everything thrown in there, or just a folder on my desktop of my laptop with all my employees' information tossed into it. Or I-9s. Yeah, I know I had to fill those things out. I'm not sure what I did with them or where I'm keeping them. I think I did them right. These are some of the thoughts that my clients have. So a lot of small businesses don't realize that there are a lot of laws around employee files and how to handle them. And both, there are 2 departments of the government that monitor that and that will do surprise audits. These branches do not need a warrant or to give any prior warning. They can show up on a small business's doorstep at any day and say, you have X amount of days to get this information to me for an audit. And I would hate to see anybody in that position, right? So what we like to do with our clients is discuss what do you do with an I-9 file? How do you have to file it? Where do you have to keep it? Personnel files. It's not as easy as just tossing everything into one folder. There has to be a definite separation of certain documents. There needs to be a payroll file and a medical file, and you can have your general personnel file and a confidential file. And when clients ask and small businesses ask me, well, why are we making this different? Why are we differentiating this? A lot of it has to go back to privacy. For example, if a manager has to review maybe a performance improvement plan that we talked about previously, and they need to review some of the documents in that employee file, they don't need to know what their medical information is. They don't need to know how much they're getting deducted from their paycheck. Or any confidential information that might be in there. It's a need to know basis. So privacy is really the biggest reason why we want to make sure that employee files are handled properly. Retention periods, storage are also really, really important. I've heard different stories about where people keep their files, and it's very, very important to not only be consistent, but to follow the government regulations, because that's something that they're looking for as well. Retention periods are very important as well. A lot of small businesses think, well, out of sight, out of mind, this employee is gone, I can get rid of everything now. Definitely not the case. So again, big mistakes happen in employee file handling. Next slide, please. Okay, so I touched on a little of this. I got ahead of myself. I knew it was coming, but as you can see in the presentation, ICE or Homeland Security investigations are the two branches of the government that have the responsibility and the authority to come to small businesses and request information to do an audit. If you can go to the next slide for me, please. Okay, thank you. Misclassification of employees and independent contractors. This is always something that I get questions about, and I feel like there isn't a day that goes by that somebody doesn't ask me something about it. And recently, the government did tighten up restrictions on this as well. So I'll touch on that a little bit. The biggest question is, how do I know? How do I know if this individual is going to be an employee? How do I know if they're going to be an independent contractor? I just don't know, and I want to make sure that I'm classifying them correctly. And the first thing I always say is there is a federal independent contractor test. Is it black and white? No, but that's why you can use an HR professional to help you interpret what that means. But there are definite boxes, so to speak, that need to be checked off if somebody is an independent contractor. And that federal test helps an employer to really make the best decision that they possibly can. Some decisions are very black and very white, and it's very easy to tell, but a lot of individuals fall into that gray area where it's difficult to ascertain employee or independent contractor. Next screen, please. So I wanted to go over some bullet points of that test. And the degree and control and independent, the degree of control and independence of the individual is first and foremost. What does that mean? That means if a small business is telling somebody when they have to show up to work, when they have to do their work, how many hours they have to work a week, when they have to come to a meeting, what rules they need to abide by, that is an employee, because that degree of control lies with the employer. Also, written contracts are a huge indication whether somebody is an employee or an independent contractor. So independent contractors are typically hired for a project or a series of projects for a limited amount of time, as you'll see in this list as well. Whether that's when this project is done, we're splitting ways, or whether that's I'm contracting you to help me in a certain department for 6 months or 1 year. If there is a definite contract, that employee is more likely to be an independent, or that individual is more likely to be an independent contractor. An employee, if it's just somebody who's with the company and there's no end in sight, so to say, of when that individual would stop working with the company, that more than likely is going to be an employee. Key functions of the business are also a really, really important indicator whether someone's an employee or an independent contractor. Is this a project that this individual is working on the side, or is this person needed for day-to-day activities? If their key functions are to get that business up and running every single day, that's not a contractor, that's an employee. So just some examples of what we go through with our clients, and when we advise, is this individual going to be classified as an employee or an independent contractor? Again, sometimes it's very, very easy to tell, but many times it is very tricky to tell. And I do have really in-depth conversations with a lot of clients to determine, because it's not easy even sometimes for the professionals to ascertain with just a short list like this. Sometimes we have to take a much, much deeper dive to it. If you can go to the next screen, please.
I can
Dennis,
take
I'm
this
going
one.
to, yeah.
Yeah, let you take a drink of water real quick.
Yeah, I'm froggy today. I'm sorry, my allergies.
No,
have
you're
started
doing
back up.
great. Just long time talk. I get it. And before I'm done with this slide, I'll throw it back over to Lori because she is a certified HR professional. I am not. But I do talk with a lot of businesses about their handbook. Oftentimes, what I see is maybe not enough emphasis on it that the HR professional, not usually an HR professional, but a business owner that lacks an HR department, they don't really understand how important it is. You can think of your employee handbook sort of like how the US looks at the US Constitution. It's that basis for all things, for the rules, for the guidelines. It as an employee, it makes you feel more comfortable because you understand what's expected, what appropriate behaviors are. Um, but it's only as good as it's enforced. You can have all the rules out there, but you need to evenly apply those among your different employees. You might have one person who's been with you for a long time, you like them a lot, versus somebody who's 6 months in. You still sort of need to hold them to that same standard. Otherwise, you might be setting yourself up for danger down the line. Um, and Lori touched on earlier, we recommend updating it annually. That's important for a couple of reasons. One, legislation changes. Those labor laws that you are held to abide by change fairly rapidly. We see it all the time. Even as a sales consultant, I'm constantly surveying the landscape of what's coming down the line in terms of legislation. And two is your business is changing. You're growing, you're evolving. The only constant in business is change. We all know that. So it's something that you should have a regular interval to make sure that it's being well updated to help your company. All right, Lori, anything to add to that? Anything to change?
No, I think that you hit it. I might just expand on some of that as we
Yeah.
go to the next slide. Okay, so as Dennis mentioned, things rapidly change with legislation, and some internal policies may stay the same for many years, and will just remain in a handbook if there's no need to update them. What are some of those policies? I'm sure a lot of people watching this webinar can relate with some of the points on this list here. And some points you might think, what is that? Why do I need that in there? It doesn't pertain to my company. I don't think that we need it. But I assure you that all these things are important. One thing, if I tell anybody, an at-will statement is the number one most important thing to have in an employee handbook. That is because we don't want employees to think that They can't leave if they don't want to. We don't want employees to think that we can't, as employers, end that working relationship if we want or need to as well. An equal opportunity statement is super important. It's something that every small business needs to abide by. It's a federal government law, state law as well, and sometimes it gets into the nitty-gritty with municipalities as well. So very, very important to outline to your employees that we are an equal opportunity employer and we are not going to discriminate based on a certain set of characteristics. A conduct statement, very, very important. A lot of stories that I hear recently, just employees just kind of doing and saying whatever they want. Not sure what's in the water recently, but it's been a problem that's been brought to my attention. So conduct statements are very important. Something that you wouldn't think that you might have to tell professionals, but sadly, sometimes we do. Sexual and unlawful harassment policies, super important. Some states require certain training on top of a statement. Ohio, where we are based in, is not one of those states, but more and more states are starting to add in that sexual harassment training annually is something that needs to be attended by all employees because it's become such a pervasive problem. A lot of times people's minds just go to sexual harassment. There are all sorts of other types of harassment out there. I've seen and heard about a number of them. So it's really about the broad umbrella of all the harassment that an employee could bring upon somebody else that we need to think about when we're writing these policies. PTO benefits and leave policies. So I know some businesses, especially small businesses, they might not have healthcare benefits, but and that's usually where someone's mind goes. But other benefits, you want your employees to know, why should you work here? We're giving you these things. Benefits can just be wellness programs and things like that, where it's not a monetary amount that you have to put on it. But you want your employees, when they're going through the employee handbook, to be aware of, oh, that's right. Oh, this is something that I can utilize. I'm really happy that my employer thought about this for me. PTO, who doesn't love some paid time off? PTO looks different for every company. It's not a one size fits all. Sometimes you need to make the decision as a business owner, am I going to do one bucket of paid time off and it's going to cover every reason why an employee is not going to be at work on any given day? Or am I going to put that time off into silos like sick time and vacation time? Again, not a one size fits all, very individual. With my clients, I talk through this to come up with the best solution for them. But definitely something that you want to outline in your employee handbook, not only because you want your employees to be aware and use that time off, but you want things clearly stated. If there's any a notice period that the employee needs to give, like a 2 or 3 week request for time off, or if there's any blackout periods throughout the year, depending on your industry, that's usually pretty common, something that I see. Whether you get paid out at the end of employment, if you have any paid time off that you haven't used yet. All these things, if put into a PTO policy, can clear up a lot of questions that the employee has. And they may not even have to come to you and ask, what happens? What do I have to do? It lays out the plan for that employee, and they can confidently say that they know what the expectations are out of them and the company. Leave policies. I'm sure everybody has heard of FMLA. A lot of small businesses do not need to follow it because they're under 50 employees. That being said, I always encourage clients to have some sort of leave policy. We're all human, right? And something is bound to happen at some time, whether that's somebody getting ill, somebody having a spouse or a child or a parent that's ill, somebody going through some private things that they just need to step away from work for a while, maybe having a baby, the list goes on, right? And if we have a good employee, and we all know that good employees are really hard to find, especially these days, do we want to lose that employee if we don't offer some sort of leave of absence? Doesn't have to be anything crazy, but it's something I always encourage my clients to think about if they aren't currently doing it, and in working with their employees the best that they can, just so that they can be an employer of choice and retain those employees. Again, who wants to lose a great employee? Health and safety section. So this can differ depending on industry. Some industries, there's a whole lot of safety standards, right? And OSHA might even oversee your business. So there's a whole lot that needs to be put into that handbook, and maybe even a separate safety manual on top of that. Beyond that, for my clients that don't have an industry where they have to abide by OSHA regulations, health is a big thing. We just went through a pandemic, right? It's getting farther and farther behind us, but it's still recent enough that we all still remember all those things that we needed to put in place to keep our employees safe. So having a statement in your employee handbook about how to handle certain situations like that, whether it's a health crisis that's widespread or just something going around the office, how you want to go ahead and handle that for everybody's health and safety. Workplace violence is sadly one of the top concerns of HR departments now. It's the landscape that we're living in, unfortunately, and that workplace violence can come from internal, it can come from vendors, it can come from clients, it can come from customers. So we want our employees to feel safe. We want them to have a plan if something should happen, and we want to be able to have an outlet for them to let us as employers know what's going on so that we can step in and we can help, whether it's something on a smaller end or something on the larger end. Absentee and tardiness policy, huge. There's probably not anybody watching who hasn't had some sort of problem with this, whether it's present or past or perhaps future or all of the above. Absentee and tardiness policies can vary depending on client and depending on industry. They can be concise or they can be very, very drawn out, even getting into, point systems and rewarding employees for showing up to work, just depending on what that individual company needs and what their employees respond best to. So absentee and tardiness policy is probably one of the first things that clients say, help, I think I need to revise this when we look at my employee handbook, because nobody's listening to it now. Why aren't they listening to it? Compensation statement and additional benefits. Like I said, you want your employees to know why they should work for you and why they should continue to work for you. You don't want them leaving to go to somebody who's going to offer them maybe one little extra benefit. You want them to know all the reasons why you are an employer of choice. Dennis touched on us working for Ohola here, and they're an employer of choice and we love it. They let us know all of the great things that they offer us. And if all small businesses did that, I'm willing to guess that the retention rate of their employees would really, maybe not skyrocket, but it really would be a little bit higher than what it is today, right? Because those employees don't always think of things that aren't in front of them all the time. So listing these things in a handbook and keeping them in front of the employees is really important. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, discriminating during interviews. I promised when we were on the first point, hiring and firing on gut feelings, that we would talk about hiring a little bit more later in the presentation. So here we are. Discriminating during interviews is a huge mistake that a lot of small businesses make. And many times it's not even that they mean to. That someone doesn't usually go out and say, I'm going to discriminate against somebody today. It could be something as simple as, just not asking the same types of questions when an interview is coming, through, or, asking something personal. So what we always recommend to avoid any sort of discrimination is just being consistent and having standardized things like point scale for interview questions, maybe a 1 through 5 or a 1 through 10, 1 through 3, whatever makes sense for the company and the industry. Same thing for job qualifications, using a point scale. So you're not, everybody's on an equal playing field. You're not saying, this one I'm just going to give a higher mark to just because. If you use something standardized across the board, you're going to be more fair and more equitable. Using a rating sheet for must-haves and nice-to-haves is really important. A lot of times when I talk to clients and small business owners, I hear a list of, here are all the things that my new employee needs to have. And sometimes we really need to break it down. Is this a nice-to-have or is this a need-to-have? Because you need to assess everybody fairly. If a candidate comes in and they check off all the need to haves and maybe not that many nice to haves, you need to focus on that needs to have column, right? And compare everybody to that needs to have when you're trying to narrow down a candidate choice. The same evaluation format is super, super important. Whether, again, you're using a point system, asking the same questions whenever I had to interview in the past or in the present. I always make sure that every position has a set amount of questions, set questions that we don't defer from, and a rating scale. And we don't go off of that. And again, for things I just mentioned, everybody can be graded fairly, so to speak, and you're comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. You don't want anybody to ever come back and say, I wasn't hired because of A, B, or C. If someone will come back and say, why wasn't I hired over this other individual? You could confidently tell yourself, I chose them because of these qualifications, these things that are related to the job, not these things that are related to their personal life. If you could go ahead and go to the next screen, please. So lots of do's and don'ts here, right? I think that a lot of us know some of the big ones, religion, arrest records, things of that, salary history, that's becoming more widespread. More states and municipalities are saying that you can't ask those questions. And I think that a lot of us know that already. Maybe we don't. That's okay. That's why we're here. It's great to focus on the do's. I think that a lot of small businesses are so worried about the what can't I do and what shouldn't I do, that they forget what can I do and how can I make this a successful interview. So you can see here, ask hiring related questions. If it's not job related, don't ask. I know just as people, we like to learn about other people and we're just curious and trying to break the ice and trying to warm up to somebody. But those can all be considered discriminatory questions. So we don't want to go ahead and do anything that could be seen as that. We just want to ask them about job related things. Any notes that you write down should only include questions and answers, questions that the interviewer is asking and answers that that candidate is giving. No notes on the side about, anything personal, any observations. You want to keep it very factual and just keep it to the basics. Again, each candidate should be evaluated using the same method, whether that's the same set of questions, the same point system, what have you. Stick to that. Listen actively. You want to make sure that you're listening for keywords, key phrases that may be important to you and or your company, or maybe a red flag. Allow for some silence. You want that candidate to be able to talk. You don't want to just talk at them, because if you're doing that, you're really not learning anything about them, are you? So we want to give all of our candidates an equal opportunity to talk and to tell us about their achievements, and why they would be good for the position. And we always want to do a follow-up. We want to do that with everybody. We don't want to just decide to do it with certain people, whether that's an email, a letter. I know there's a phone call. I know there's a few different ways we can go ahead and follow up with a candidate. And as long as you're following up consistently, that's the important thing. Some of the things we don't want to do, we don't want to make assumptions. We want to, going back to actively listening. If we have a question, and it's appropriate to ask it, and then listen to their answer, so that you're not filling in gaps on your own, maybe using your own biases. Don't ask about personal, information. Again, that's a huge no-no. We don't want to judge somebody based on what they do outside of work. We also don't want to be influenced by appearances. This kind of goes back to the I'm going to make assumptions and fill in the gaps myself. Not something you should ever do. And again, going back to the never bring up religion, any affiliations. Something as simple as, do you belong to such and such a club? Unless it is relevant to the job, then it's off the table. It's something you really cannot ask. Again, nothing about their personal life, even if you're just making chit chat and getting to know somebody. Nothing about salary history. The government's really cracking down on that now, like I mentioned before. And we don't want to ask what they've made in the past. We're focusing on the future, right? And a lot of small businesses don't realize that there's something called ban the box. I don't know if anybody who is watching has heard about this. It has to do with arrest records, and when you can and cannot ask about arrests in the past. So those are some of the things that you are totally off the table that you never want to get yourself involved with when you're talking to a candidate. If you can go to the next slide, please. Dennis, do you want to go over this pinwheel?
Sure, happy to. All right, so when it comes to company culture, obviously we all want to keep it high, and sometimes that bottom line becomes our mindset of how can we add here, subtract here to make that number better. But company culture is that bottom line. It supports that. When you have that strong company culture, like I kind of talked about at the beginning with Ahola, there was a lot of things about the culture that bled out to the people who work there and attracted me to the company. And I know that that's the same story with a lot of other people at the company. And your business could be like that. If you really focus on fostering that great company culture, your people are going to love working for you. They're going to work harder for you, and they're going to stay longer. Strong company culture attracts the best people. It gets the most out of them. Your customers are going to have a better experience because they're going to be working with more capable people. And it builds that positive brand reputation for your company. It's just this thing that goes and goes and goes. It's almost like a magic, I would say, with company culture, because it's hard to define a culture, but you kind of like it's almost a vibe, as the kids would say. And it bleeds out to everything else in the company. Nobody wants to stay at a company with a poor culture. We all know this. So you need to make it a priority in your company, because it's what's going to ultimately boost that bottom line. And I'll give you the stat at the bottom. According to Mineral's 2023 State of the HR report, 87% of small businesses report retain and engage existing employees as the most critical HR initiative. There's a lot of ways to do that. Our call's almost over here. If you want to talk more to us about this, reach out to me, another rep at Ahola. We're happy to talk about that. Anything you should add to that, Lori?
The only thing I think I would add is when I was putting together these top 7 mistakes, I really wanted to put this as the first. It's such a foundation for the success of your business. Everything from hiring to firing, everything from your profits and your losses. It's just so huge. I cannot stress enough how important that vibe is, as Dennis said, for your company. And it's something that sometimes isn't easily attained, but nonetheless, super, super important, and something that if you have it, you know it, and you don't ever want to lose it. Go to the next slide, please. Really quick, because I know we're at the end, but you'll receive a copy of this. Kind of like with the interviewing questions, we're so focused on the don'ts. Sometimes we don't focus on the do's. In a lot of companies could really improve their culture just by following some of these check marks on the do list. I'm not going to go through them all. Of course, you can see for yourselves, but you want to make sure that you provide a home away from home, so to speak, that is comfortable to come to every day, where your employees feel supported, where your employees feel safe, where your employees feel valued. And with those things, your culture, if it's not where you want it to be, you can start to build it to where you want to be. So focus on the do's. You want to do the do's. And that's going to really help you, like I said, get you to where you want to be and have your employees come in with a smile every day and just want to do their best for you because you do your best for them, basically. If you can go to the next slide. Do we have some time for client examples or
Lori, why don't we've got a few questions in the
Sure.
chat box. Maybe if you could give us one really strong client example, and then we'll move to the questions.
Sure. The first one that comes to mind is a client of mine before they were a client of mine and before they were a client of Ahola's. The government did show up on their doorstep one day. I don't remember if it was ICE or if it was Homeland Security, but they did knock on her door and they said, you have 24 hours to produce all this information on your employees to me. And I'm going to come back and audit it. And she was freaking out, wasn't sure where things were stored, wasn't sure if everything was complete, wasn't sure if it was put together properly, and she got some hefty fines. She was not happy, as I don't imagine any business owner would be, and that's kind of what prompted her to come on to the HR consulting service to make sure that everything was in proper order. But that was a very scary experience for her. And I can't imagine being on the receiving end of that knock on the door. So that's just one. But again, you guys are going to get these slides so you can read through some of them.
Thank you. What a terrifying, everyone's like nightmare, right?
Right.
So I'm going to jump right into some of the questions. The first one up is, can you have all I-9s in one file? And how about all medical in one file?
So you can have every active employee, you can have all of their I-9s in one file. Those I-9s need to be stored separate from personnel files. If you're doing it, what I like to call the old-fashioned way that a lot of people still do, and it's completely fine. If you're using actual paper files, that I-9 folder with all your active employees needs to be in a completely separate drawer or cabinet than the employee files. The distance is important too. That's how much of a stickler the government is. And active employees and inactive employees, if the I-9s are within the retention period that you should be keeping them, they can be kept together, the active, and together, the inactive. You don't want to mix the two together, and you want to keep all that, again, separate from any of the personnel files. Personnel files, as far as medical goes, I would never stick all of your employees' medical information together. I would do a folder within a folder. So whether that means, electronically, or if that means, in a file cabinet, you're allowed to have one personnel file with subcategories and subfiles in it. So I always recommend setting it up like that, files within a file. So with my example earlier, if you needed to pull, say, some disciplinary information for a manager, you could extract that really quickly and give it to the individual who needs it, and they wouldn't be privy to any of the other information. I hope that answers the question.
Let's move on to thank you. Let's move on to the second one we have. Is there any specific guidance on how organizations use virtual assistants as subcontractors? It feels like we're treading the line between employee and subcontractor often.
So that's actually a very timely question. I had somebody ask me that last week. It's not as easy. It's one of those gray areas I was talking about that I would need more information on. Honestly, it kind of depends on the relationship, whether it's, again, the degree of control, how much power over that individual the company has. So I wish I had a very clear answer for you. Without knowing more, I don't have a clear answer. But it is a concern. And I know that a lot of people are in that space of the gray area where it's just really, really hard to differentiate. If somebody who doesn't have HR support wants to reach out to maybe an employment attorney, that's always an option, not always the most financially feasible. At the end of the day, I always say err on the side of caution and be more conservative. If it's more in favor of the employee, the government's going to be okay with that. It comes into if it's going to be unfair to the employee in any sort of way, that's where employers can kind of get themselves caught up.
Thank you. Sounds like a case-by-case basis type
Very
of
much so. Very much
Yeah.
so.
Then the last question we have is, if you can't ask a person's previous salary, if you can't ask what it was, what can you ask? And what prevents a person to increase what salary they had with the previous employer?
So what I would say to that is do your research on, we call it salary banding in the HR world. Do your research on, for your market, for your industry, for your employee size, what is the typical pay range for that that individual, and are there tiers within that? And have an idea of what you are willing to pay. And that's how you're going to have to go ahead and approach it. And tell candidates, this is the pay range, or this is the starting salary, and it goes up depending on experience. Like you said, people can make up whatever they want. So even if you were allowed to ask what did you make at your last position, they could definitely inflate that to try to perhaps make more, get more money out of a new employer. So I always tell clients, even if you're upset that you can't ask, if you could, is that information that candidate's giving you really going to be something that you would want to rely on? So again, figuring out for your market, industry, employee size, what that position should be paying between, and what qualifications that candidate has, that's where they should fall. And every company is different, again, kind of case by case. Some companies larger companies are going to be able to pay more for the same role. So again, very individual. I'm not a clear-cut answer like most of HR. It's very gray. But I would say focus more on what you are going to pay and what is appropriate, and go from there.
Well, thank you. And thanks everyone for being with us today. We are at the end of our time, but great conversation. And again, Dennis, Lori, and all of the team at AHOLA, thank you so much for sharing how to navigate that very difficult, sometimes HR minefield. So just keep watching. We'll have more events coming soon. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.